Hello, Audrey. It's a pleasure to have you here. I feel like I'm closing a circle that I started last year. I interviewed Donald Ryan. He was part of the festival, and he recommended your book as kind of one of the interesting additions to Irish literature, recent Irish literature, and so it's great to have you here to talk about the undertaking.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Donal, for the recommendation.
I'll need to invite you to a pint. Okay, so you talk in your afterword. You talk about how Henry Ball's works kind of talk about the Irish and how partial his view was of your country, or how you thought his works were kind of offering a partial view of the country, of the Irish people. After reading the book, I don't think anybody will have a doubt that you had the right to write this book. But why did you feel that you needed to get the novel out there? Why this story called you and got you into doing research? And
it wasn't even so much that it called me, so much as it just wouldn't let me go. I first went to Germany when I was 18, and I am not at all of German origin. I have no German background. I didn't do German in school, and I landed in very naively, knowing only that there had been a war, that the British, the Americans, not even that the Russians had won, but that the British and Americans had triumphed, and that 6 million dead in the Holocaust. And really, I was having a nice time as an 18-year-old, and I just landed in and was shocked, actually, by the silence, because in Ireland, although we weren't involved in the war, in the Second World War, there was no silence, because you were inundated with material from Britain and America about their triumphs, really. Films, books. It was impossible in the 1980s to escape the war. It was absolutely impossible. You had John Cleese goose-stepping around your television screen, going, don't mention the war. And, it was actually, Dad's Army, it was a source of humour, really. And then I got there, and there was nothing. It was silence. It was though I had actually even come to the wrong country, possibly, because there was nothing, and there was no way of talking to people about it either, not even people my own age. It was just curtains drawn. There was no entry into that zone. And maybe it was me. Maybe I didn't push enough. Maybe I was too sensitive to the silence. But I think if you come from Ireland, you know about silence. You learn
about holding things.
And you learn to. But this was a kind of even a different silence to the Irish silence, and I suppose I was fascinated by that, and I was also fascinated by actually how nice everybody was, and that sounds really ridiculous, but because I suppose you'd grown up with quite a cliched view and
German.
And you just, it's not black and white, it's grey, and that's really what I learned. I learned grey then, I think. And once you start seeing the world in grey, it's very hard to shift from that colour. And I went on. I very much went on with life. I travelled a lot then. I travelled extensively. But before I left my kind of, if you like, my German period of life, I had this experience that stayed with me very much. I was in Munich, and I met an American Jewish man who was on a 6-month tour of Europe, and he had lost people at Dachau, and he had pledged to his family that he would go and visit Dachau. And I met him, I think, on a Sunday evening in Munich, and he was going to go to Dachau the next day, and I said, well, look, I'll go with you. So we went down, and because it was Monday, it was closed, the camp was closed, and he couldn't gain access, and he was flying back to the US the next day. And he became very upset because he hadn't fulfilled his promise, and to kind of deal with the upset, I suggest we walk around the perimeter. And as we walked, we met a German woman.
Mm-hmm.
And we were chatting. It was a beautiful summer's day, and her house abutted the camp wall.
Mm-hmm.
And she was tending to her garden, and we were just really having a regular conversation. He had no German, she had no English, so I was interpreting, and the conversation went on, and as it went on, she just casually mentioned that she had lived in this house all her life. And for him, this was almost like a punch in the stomach, because how could you have been there? How could you still live here after what had gone on the other side of the wall, after what had happened to my relatives? And in the end, it was a very difficult situation, because he, in the end, was shouting at this older German woman, and basically I was interpreting. And, you know, she kept saying, well, what could I do? What could I have done? I didn't know anything, and even if I did know something, what could I have done? And, you know, back to this field of grey, you felt, obviously from his perspective, he is completely right. You know, why didn't you do something?
Yeah, but as you were saying on the panel yesterday,
you know, what do you do?
The little things.
You know, what do you do? And she had found, as I really began to realise, she had found that the way to deal with this trauma, because it was a trauma, was just to pull down the shutters and say, well, I didn't know anything. Anyway, if I had known something, what could I do? So that was her way of living with it. And you knew, looking at her, that if she ever shifted from that view, she was destroyed. You know, she was going to collapse. Those were two things, and I just kind of went on. So just in terms of my preoccupation with the whole thing. And I went into journalism, and I just, you know, but I kind of always, I wanted to do more than journalism. I wanted to write, and I was in a restaurant in West Cork. This is kind of a bizarre connection, but I was having dinner one night in West Cork about 16 years ago, and it was a Japanese restaurant, an amazing place down in Akista. Really remote. It was the front room of this couple's house, and she was Japanese and did all the cooking, and he was German in front of house. And he sat down with us at the end of the night and talked about his time in the war, which was very unusual. You know, it was obviously particularly unusual because we were in remote West Cork, but but you know, he was I think probably quite liberated because he was in Ireland, so he was really happy to talk about his wartime experiences. And we were just chatting, and he had been on the Russian front, and he casually mentioned that he married a woman he didn't know to get honeymoon leave, and that she in exchange got a pension if he died. And I was like, you what? And everything, I just knew that this was a vehicle for all of this earlier stuff, from my first encounters.
So that's how you met Katharina and Peter. That's how you found your characters.
Yeah, it was that night, and I didn't know at that stage it was going to be a novel, but I knew this was my way of understanding and exploring what that obsession, that thing that wouldn't let me go, and that grey. You know, how do you go about that grey? You're Irish, you're not German, it's not your story. But suddenly here was my way into looking at that grey and exploring that whole world with these
surprising what you can find in Cork.
Cork is amazing. You know, great food and great stories. So
I wanted to ask you to kind of two things that are linked together. How long do you take to research? Because obviously there's a lot of research on this novel, and basically, was it deliberate to use a dialogue to define your characters? Was it to avoid sentimentalism? Was it because, I think you mentioned something about there's no hiding on dialogue yesterday on the panel. Was that something that you kind of found when you started to write, or something that that you had in mind before that, like defining what was happening and how?
There are a few questions in there.
Yeah, I know.
So I suppose it took... It basically, I when I started off, if I had known what was involved, I would never have done it. So basically, I thought I could write just about Peter and Katharina, quite, or beta, I get that either, quite easily. But then, you know, possibly even just a short story, because they are what fascinated me. But then the more I read, the more I wanted to know, the more. So it kind of grew. It was quite an organic process, if you like. But what I always knew was it had to be very sparsely written. Because in a way, when I set out, this wasn't even really just about Germany, because this was about Bosnia, this was about Northern Ireland, this was about war.
And about the little things we give in.
Yeah, and how incremental your participation, even if you're not on the front, your participation in a war is and can be. So the spareness comes, I suppose, because, you know, I never even really placed the novel, you know, in a location. You could, in a way, be anywhere. You know, you could, like the city of Berlin. You know, I don't describe it really. You know, but you know you're there. But yet
it could be any other city.
It could be New York. It could be anywhere. And I very much wanted to achieve that. So for two reasons. Number one, that kind of sense that actually there's a common denominator to all wars and to all human behaviour patterns in war and what people will do to survive a war. But also the spareness to create a space for the reader, because I went to Germany all those years ago with that very much British American view, and it was too simple. You know, it didn't understand at all the whole picture, and I knew, you know, I knew I had to walk the line, not of sympathy but of empathy, because really, what is there to sympathise with? I don't sympathise with the choices that were made, but I can empathise because I can say, well, what would I have done? I can intellectually engage on a human level with the position they were in. So, you know, by holding only to dialogue, and by creating almost a piece of theatre, and as so you have these two characters on a stage, or however many other characters come in, you know, a theatre audience engages much more than often novel readers will, because novel readers are used to being told what to think, to feel, whereas in the theatre, you know, it's like, well, what do you think? You know, interact with me here. So I wanted that for the book. And it's funny because I've started now in my second book, and it's a completely different approach, different tone, different. So yeah, it was specific to that.
I wanted to go into, because as you said, we had kind of a view of the war from the American point of view and from the Belgic point of view as well. Like war scenes were everywhere in movies and books. It's what is being talked about. But the domestic, the kind of in your house scenes, I thought they were the most unsettling when I was reading the book, because I thought I saw the transformation of the characters. And I wanted to ask you what testimonies or what part of your research brought you to those little things, because that I thought that could have been the most difficult bits to find.
Well, I suppose I started, research-wise, I started with, you know, kind of your tertiary texts, your biographies, your more academic, you know, your overall histories, and then moved really until I was dealing all the time with first-hand accounts. And diaries, and
I mean, women, the testimony of women.
Completely the testimony of women. So, you know, The Woman of Berlin, the Christabel Bielenberg book. So all those, you know, all those kind of narrative, more diary type books.
More personal memory kind of thing.
Yeah. And things that, you know, I think actually, touching what I was saying last night, history is just so often taken from the top down. You know, it's a very male perspective. It's, you know, leadership, you know, and it's all about kind of strategy. And as long as that's great, because that allows you to dehumanize the decisions you're making, the decisions you're taking, and also to dehumanize war. And, you know, I suppose in journalism, when I covered war, I very much did it from the perspective of the ordinary people, because that's
what kind of
the
matters to
reality.
you. Yeah.
You know, that's the reality. And usually those ordinary people are women and children, often older people, but the men are gone. But the women, just what they take on is extraordinary, and what's foisted upon them is extraordinary. Now, obviously, Katharina made choices within that context of Nazi Germany that resulted in horrendous consequences for other women and children. And I suppose the domestic front allowed me to, I suppose, show that interplay between Katharina on a domestic front, but also, you know, intermittently, it was the one area where I could weave the whole Jewish, the vacuum left by the removal of the Jews was in that domestic setting. So, you know, they take over the Jewish apartment, or she meets the Jewish woman in the park. You know, there was a little bit. There was one scene there's one scene in the front where there's an interaction between the soldiers and Jewish goods, clothing and stuff that the Jews have been stripped of. But principally, we see the Holocaust through the domestic front.
Through the domestic, yeah.
You know, and I thought that was very important, because that's the
that
most
kind of
horrific part.
the
Isn't
reader.
that the most horrific part of the Holocaust? Is the way people were just able to close their eyes to their neighbours, you know, or able to go to the pawn shop to buy a coat that had once been on the back of a Jewish child, you know. And then you can be very, you know, certain that, oh my God, that is horrendous. But if you stand there for a moment and say, well, it's winter, there's a coat in the pawn shop that I can buy, my child is cold, will I buy it? You know, and I suppose those are the questions I asked myself to frankly answer, you know. And
you wouldn't know what you would have done. Yeah,
I kind of say, well, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have taken over an apartment, but I can't actually be categoric that I wouldn't have bought the coat, you know. And
we're self-serving, you know? As you were saying.
That's nice. You're self-serving, and survival of the fittest, and it's all of those little cliches that are cliches because there's truth in them. It's hard, and it was a hard book to write because of that, because it was so damn simple in a way. It just crept up on people
and admitted to yourself that if you were in that situation, you probably would have gone not that far from the path that they took. So, yeah. I wanted to finish with, what are you working on at the moment?
It's a secret.
Oh, I hate those.
So it is, I'm afraid.
Ah, okay. So you come next year and tell us.
Oh God, no, much slower than that. But I'd love to come back. But you'll have to be patient, I'm afraid.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks a million for coming, and
been a
it's a pleasure to read the book and to have you here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.